Hey, this is Mike Diercksen from Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Bite podcast. Tune in as we spotlight our guests, Nick Demonte, Mason Coordinator, and Tim Nelson, Plastering Coordinator at the Operative Plasters and Cement Masons International Association through the International Training Fund. Our episode today is focused on virtual training and educating the workforce. For more information on this episode and others, please check out the Building Bite at www.buildwithproactive.com. Welcome to the Building Bite podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals where you can hear from the experts about key topics to help you be successful. I'm Mike Diercksen, the Manager of Marketing and Business Development here at Proactive, and our guests today are innovators in the construction industry, Nick Demonte and Tim Nelson. Nick is the Cement Mason Coordinator, and Tim is the Plastering Coordinator at the Operative Plasters and Cement Masons International Association and International Training Fund. Nick, Tim, how are you guys doing today?
Good. Great, Michael. How are you today? And you did excellent with our title there. That's usually a mouthful for a lot of people. So you did fantastic with that. Congrats.
I was pretty proud of myself. That was a good one. And it's a lot, but there's a lot of good content there. So we're excited for it, guys. Before we kind of kick off our show, it's so great to connect with you both. Before we get into the topic, though, if you could just tell our audience a little bit about yourselves, your career, kind of how you got to be where you are today. Nick, I would offer you first. What can you share with us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Nick Demonte. I was born in Italy. I came to this country when I was 9 years old. I'm a second generation cement mason. My father's a retired cement mason from Cleveland, Ohio, local 404. I'm actually celebrating an anniversary this year. As of February 24th here, became a 30-year member in the OPCMIA, as I like to say. So I'm very proud of that. To be 30 years in one industry is quite an accomplishment. And saying
Absolutely.
that, I'm a little broken down, but we're good still. In saying that, let's see. I'm married. I have triplets. I have 2 boys and a girl that are 24 years old right now. So my life is transformed from being very hectic at one point to settling down a little bit right now, right? But now we also have other hurdles. In saying that, I've been an instructor at a local 404 roughly since 2014 to 2018. And that's when I became the ITF Cement Mason instructor. I did that for 5 years, and then I got promoted to be the ITF Cement Mason Coordinator. And that's my current role right now.
Excellent. And Tim, what about yourself?
Yeah, so Tim Nelson, I'm married with 2 grown children. Just celebrated the birth of our first grandchild.
Congratulations.
In late October, Vivian Rose. So I'm a 4th generation plasterer. I began my trade in my father's shop, and the first day I reported for work, he said, "I'm going to teach you a trade and I'm going to give you the whole world to make a living in." And I thought, that sounds cute, And then 8 years later, I was recruited by Bechtel to plaster the American Embassy in Moscow, Russia. And I realized this is a trade that I can literally take anywhere around the world. Now, do I want to be a plasterer in Phoenix, Arizona in July? Maybe not so much. Do I want to be a plasterer in Chicago, Illinois in January? Well, if there's a lot of interior work, probably not a problem. But I was fortunate to learn my trade in the San Francisco Bay Area, where we had just beautiful weather like Nick grew up with in Italy, a nice Mediterranean climate where it's never too hot, never too cold, and a plasterer can work year round. So I started teaching in the apprenticeship program with Local 66 in San Francisco in 1999, 2000. I like to tell people I've been training since last century. And then in 2007, I was hired to be the Job Corps plastering instructor at Treasure Island Job Corps, where I worked with at-risk youth, 16 to 24-year-olds, teaching them the plastering trade and trying to give them an opportunity to gain direct entry into the plasterers apprenticeship program in Local 66. In 2014, I was hired to be the director of the Labor Management Cooperation Committee for Northern California Plasterers. And there I basically monitored prevailing wage projects in California. And being that I was big in apprenticeship, one of the things I liked about that was in those state projects, I was able to make sure that apprentices were being used in the proper ratios, basically one apprentice for every 5 journeymen, because if we want our trade to continue on, we need to keep training future generations. So that was a good opportunity there. And then I was given the opportunity to interview for the Plastering Coordinator position here at the ITF in 2019. And real happy they selected me. And so for the last 5 years, I've worked here coordinating training events for our instructors around the country and training new instructors in both hands-on training as well as safety training.
That's excellent, guys. And it's clear that there's a passion, right? You have lived this trade. You are 2nd and 4th generation, respectively, within these trades, and there's a desire to pass that along, which shows. So it kind of leads us right into our main topic, which is virtual training, enhancing the on-job learning. And so, guys, we connected while out at the CURT National Convention earlier this year, and I'm really glad that there is no video of me doing these trainings, but you actually had some VR capabilities out there. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of, give us an oversight, kind of the kind of trainings you're bringing to the marketplace, helping those journeymen kind of get better understanding and shortening that learning curve. So, Nick, if you could just lead us off, I guess you had the rider training that you had there.
Yeah, so we have 2 different trainings. I'll talk about the rider training, and I'll have Tim talk about the plaster for fireproofing training that we have there. So we run them kind of simultaneously just to kind of show at different events new training techniques that we have out there. As we know, the cost of materials these days are very expensive, and especially for concrete, you're looking at probably $180 to $200 a yard. And a 10-yard truck, cost over $1,000, and then you'd add admixtures and taxes and all this kind of stuff, depending on the area. It can get quite costly. So it's not an item that we can just regularly train on while we're in our apprenticeship programs. So one of the biggest benefits that we get from the rider training is we can simulate being on a slab, and we can show our apprentices and journeymen skills on how to drive the rider onto the floor. And while you're riding onto the floor, we can talk to them about basic concepts. So one of the biggest things for cement masons is flatness, level and flat. So FF numbers, we talk a lot about FF numbers. So trying to achieve those numbers, how you drive the rider onto the floor in patterns is going to be essential to achieving those numbers for flatness and levelness. And unfortunately, like I said, you don't have 30,000 square feet to just practice on in your training facilities. So we can show them the skills and how we run the equipment, how we can go forward, how we go backwards, the way the blades spin, whether I'm taking material to the edges or I'm taking it away from the edges, crossing patterns, going from one end to the other end. It shows a color disfiguration there. So it sees the areas that you missed, which will in turn end up being little high spots. So we talked the importance of how we want to run in ribbons and rows, and how we want to go in one direction and then come back and cross it in a different direction, right? So we can teach them all those skills on a machine that we wouldn't be able to do that. You are able to do it out in the field, but you have a limited amount of time that you can practice doing that, right? And as journeymen, we bring the floor up into a certain hardness before we'll let an apprentice kind of get on there just to practice. So this way they have a little bit of insight, they have a little bit of feel on how the equipment works and how it runs.
Yeah. Excellent. And Tim, maybe a little bit about the fireproofing training as well.
Yeah, so a lot of the things that Nick talked about, the cost of materials, covering materials, and then once you're done with those materials, dumping them in a landfill, it's almost as costly to dump it today as it is to purchase the materials. And then we want to be as sustainable as we can, right? But what I love about the fireproofing VR, whether we're using the IFRM sprayer, that's the intumescent fireproofing, or the cementitious fireproofing, it gives a green apprentice who's never been on scaffold, who's never held the tools in their hands, gives them an opportunity to experience the sights and the sounds of the fireproofing, as you were able to find out there in Arizona. You can hear the sound of that nozzle spraying. You see the sights in the background. And I like the real-time feedback it gives, because we engineered in the ability that if they stay in one spot too long, that fireproofing will slide right off the beam, because that's what's happening out in the real world. And so it's a really good training tool there, in that we're not spending a lot of our resources on the material while they are learning some of the mechanics of applying the material. The other thing we really love about the VR is it's a great promotional tool when at trade fairs or at job fairs in high schools, where you can take this out there and you have a young audience who just loves virtual reality, and it just kind of piques their curiosity once they get in there and they see that, oh, I can do this. And it gives you an opportunity to start talking to them about a possible career when they leave high school. So that's what we love about the technology that VR has brought to our industry.
Yeah, no, guys, it's a dynamic offering, and again, very glad the video doesn't exist. To me, I think I was ducking underneath a beam that doesn't exist, and on the conference room floor. But in all seriousness, it's something that our listeners are probably very interested in, right? There's no replicating on the job learning. However, giving these apprentices the experience of, it's not the first time I've held the tool before. It's not the first time I've virtually been on a rider before. I kind of know the sights and sounds of what I'm looking for. Can you share with us, what was really the motivation behind the concept of bringing this to VR, right? I don't think people necessarily think of the plaster and cement trades as, oh yeah, those guys are tech savvy, but clearly you've done this and you found a way to do it. So what was really the inception of that? Why go to VR?
Yeah, well, Tim hit on it very nicely there at the end, right? Recruitment. That was a big tool for us. And trying to get people to come into our industry is essential in trying to make them understand that it's another tool in our toolbox, as we like to say, right? Different ways that we can attract people into our trade, because the old model of coming there and coming to work and grinding out in the field and so on, that's kind of it's always constantly evolving from generation to generation to generation. So recruitment is a big portion of it, right? We know that a lot of the younger generation likes to do a lot of stuff with technology. They love, doing VR, augmented reality. We are involved in some of that as well. We're working on some of those things as well. Then you talk about using computers and software, construction management software programs that are out there. Back in the day, we used to read blueprints off of two-dimensional drawing, right? A sheet of paper. Now there's BIM, building information modeling.
Right.
So we can actually show a three-dimensional version, and they can relate to that so much better than just looking at it as a drawing. So we like to show them the old way of doing things, but then we also like to incorporate new technologies into our training programs moving forward. So that's how it really kind of got started, is from the recruitment end of it. But then at some point you also got to be able to physically perform the work.
Right.
Like I said, it's another tool in the toolbox for all of our instructors that are in all of our locals all across the country to use to help their apprentices train in a different way.
Yeah, no, excellent. It's something that we hear all the time, Nick. Well, we go to different conferences, we're out on the podcast having different guests from different aspects of our industry. The labor shortage isn't going away. And so I wonder, Tim, from your perspective, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges facing getting people into the workforce these days? I know you had mentioned technology as a catalyst of kind of driving new talent to the space, but kind of where are we missing the mark here?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for asking it, Mike. I think the problem began with high school administrators who were telling their counselors, send kids to college. That's, that's how we get rated as high schools. I had a friend who was a high school counselor back in California, and she was told by the administration, don't send any of your kids into the building trades and don't send any of them to the military. We're only sending our kids to college. Well, putting a square peg in a round hole doesn't work, right? And there are people who are very gifted with their hands. Doesn't mean intellectually that they're behind anybody, but we're just all wired differently. I have my degree in physical education. I also have a teaching credential with the state of California in career technical training. But when my dad gave me the opportunity to learn a trade, I thought, wow, this will be a great way to feed my family in the summer months as a teacher. Maybe when I learn my trade, I'll be able to put a little more on the table than a teacher's salary. Well, I started plastering and I loved it. I got good at it early. I worked on some amazing projects, and the more I did it, the more I loved it. So when you have people who are, maybe it's a little strong to say poisoning the water hole, but telling people you don't want to go there, it's very difficult for us to recruit at those high schools to encourage those students to come into our industry. And so it was kind of frustrating going to job fairs and high schools and getting no response because coming in, the odds were stacked against us, I mean, college is a great thing, but we're able to take all these new emerging technologies and give new tools to a new generation coming into our industry that is going to allow them not just to be a member of the crew, because in Nick's trade and my trade, we work in crews, we work as a team. There are no lone wolves in our shops. And so do you want to just be a guy on the crew, or do you want to be the guy running the crew? And so, we're able to teach foreman training, which is something that we developed here at the ITF. We're able to introduce them to new software management, construction management software like Procore or Bluebeam or Autodesk, and give them those tools that they can set the bar how far they want to go in our industry.
It's college is a great thing. It's not for everyone, right? And that's definitely one of the through lines we've seen as well, right? With this labor shortage, just how do we attract those new workers and kind of changing the way we talk about it. So I think that's a great point there, Tim. And so, one of the ways we find that our listeners best take on these examples is with a real life case study or an example. So, Nick, I wonder if you could share with us a little bit, some of the benefits you've seen through administering these VR trainings, how it's impacting the workforce. How many people are you able to train at one time? And, you can kind of take this show on the road. So is there any limits to where it can be done?
Well, as far as how many people we can train at one time, depending on how many pieces of VR equipment you have, you might only be able to train one or two at a time, right? But in saying that, as far as you can train anywhere you like with it, we're trying something that our training, the OPCMIA is trying to do, is trying to get a VR piece of equipment in all of our apprenticeship programs, right? Like we said, it's another tool in the toolbox that they could use. So definitely we have apprenticeship programs, roughly around 30 to 35 spread all over the country. And if we're able to do that, put a VR training in each one of those areas, then they can use them at any time during the training, right? And then they also can use them for recruitment purposes, like we had said, right? So there are some drawbacks to it, and it's not a perfect system, but like I said, it gives you the basic fundamental tools that we can at least get them going. Now, when they get into that job site, you look about rider training and we want them to use a trowel machine. We want to try to get the floor to a certain hardness, right? Certain denseness. That's the whole concept behind it.
Right.
So understanding that we have to catch edges around the perimeter. Well, that means our workforce is out there troweling on their hands and knees. And if we hit them with the rider, you could potentially do a lot of damage.
Right.
Or if you drive the rider off the side of a building, guardrail system. So there's also like safety considerations that evolve into all those areas as well. And just one of the things that we're also working on as well now for as far as VR training is we like to call it Safety World. So me and Tim are both master trainers for CPWR. So we train our instructors the 500 series to be able to deliver OSHA 10s and 30s to our workforce that's out there. So Safety World is Tim works a lot on scaffolds. They can go in and find all the hazards that are involved in a scaffold system. Right. So there's so many different ways that we can try to incorporate the VR training. So obviously, it's how much time do you want to spend on a piece of equipment? We can't have, if we have 10 students, everybody doing it at the same time. Unfortunately, that's probably one of the drawbacks a little bit there.
Yeah.
As well,
If I could jump in for a second, and that's all great stuff, Nick. So we recently worked with the Buffalo Plastering Apprenticeship in New York, and we did both intumescent and cementitious fireproofing training. And, when you've got 12 people, only one person can spray that nozzle, so you want to teach them the whole 9 yards of the process. So you have people mixing, you have people pulling the hose, people spraying. But beauty of having the VR was that I was able to take half of the group and show them how to apply fireproofing in a virtual world while the other half were in the real world spraying with the real thing. And so it really, it's kind of, I coached a lot of baseball, Little League, Babe Ruth, even in the college. And, you don't need people just standing around with nothing to do. So it really gives us a chance to expand on our training and keep our students involved and engaged so that they don't just get bored and think, all right, when's this going to be over?
Right. Yeah, and there also you lose the the very real variable there, which is time, right? You can't the cement's going to harden, so there's only so much time in a real life application before you go, well, this piece is done and I can't do any training on this anymore. So you kind of while it's one at a time, at the same time you are able to kind of reuse that same virtual piece of training over and over and over again, so you're not, hey, we've sprayed this beam 6 times, can't keep doing it, guys. So you can kind of do that. So that's very good. It's a really dynamic tool. And I wonder, is there a preferred size or group? I mean, you mentioned you had about 12 people at a time and kind of letting you split off. Is that the goal, is kind of to kind of keep it smaller groups but get them those hours together?
I mean, it's ideal to have a smaller group, but that's not always the reality, right? And so, what we like to do is train our apprentices so that once they've learned something, they can basically tell another apprentice who's maybe younger than them in the trade, show them, because by actually trying to teach somebody else, they're really formulating it in their own mind. If you have to train somebody on how to do it, it makes you think through the process, and it actually helps you learn the skill better. Nick, you got anything on that?
No, I think you hit that very well, right? I mean, obviously, the smaller the group, the more hands-on they're going to be able to get. Like we said, we don't, unfortunately, even if you're pouring 30,000 square feet, you might have 3-4 riders out on the floor. So there's different stages, different phases of when you're running the rider. Am I just breaking the floor open?
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of variables that go into that too. So we can explain to them, okay, we need to take into consideration, you're bringing the trucks in, you're backing them up, whether you're using a pump truck right?
Mhm.
Now that fills in one bay. So now you have to learn how to keep track of each bay
Mhm.
and we use accelerators to try to catch the slab up as we like to finish it, right?
Mhm.
So if you think about it, you start on one end of the floor. Is the sun going to be hitting on this side of the floor? Where's the shade going to be on the other side?
Right.
Right? So how you organize your pour, where you stage your equipment, those are all things you can kind of go over and talk to them about,
Mhm.
and they get a true good visual on that and how it works. Now, when they get into that on the job site and they're seeing this perform, it triggers something into their mind, and
Right.
it comes more natural to them because they remember being in
Mhm.
that scenario, being in that environment, what it takes to be in those areas, right? And it kind
Yeah.
of all comes to them. Like I
Mhm.
said, it's not a fix all for everything, because unfortunately it doesn't show you what the timing of actually putting the equipment on the slab. If you put it
Mhm.
on too early, it's going to sink. You're
Right.
not going to be able to ride it. You're going to do a lot more damage that way. So
Mhm.
it does have some things that you need to talk them through and make them
Right.
understand those type of things. But
Mhm.
again, is understanding, people get on the rider, their first impression is that we want to look forward when we're driving. Well, it's actually the opposite for us. We're always looking behind because we're leaving the trail. What does it look
Mhm.
like behind us? Are we missing those holes,
Right.
right? Are we missing certain areas where we haven't opened up the floor that it might give us little ridges and little humps?
Mhm.
Okay, so they understand that concept. Do I need to turn more onto the side to get
Mhm.
into a tighter area? Is there a drain? I need to stay away from the drain because I can't dip down. It's a flat piece of equipment
Mhm.
that is 8 to 10 feet wide, depending on the size of it. And if there's a drain area, I'm not going to be able to go down into those drain areas because I will flatten them out. And now we don't have the water pitches running into those
Right.
drains and so on. Right. So you can address all those things going around pipes
Mhm.
and all those things. How close do we get? How far away do we need to get? So
Yeah.
you can address all those things when
It's
you're
an
doing your training.
enhancement, not a replacement,
Correct.
right? It's meant to
Correct.
enhance that.
It's
That's
a
right.
great tool,
Yeah.
to use to help our instructors. And like my dad always said, if the work isn't fun, the work doesn't get done. And so if they have fun working on the VR, we've got them.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. And guys, this has been such a good conversation today. We really thank you for sharing your time and your experience with us. One of the things we like to do on the show is ask for 3 takeaways, right? So, keeping in mind that our audience is primarily the stakeholders of carriers, brokers, contractors, risk managers, what do you think the 3 big takeaways should be for them today coming away from this episode?
So for us, is our organization's motto is very simple. It's 3 words, right? I
Mhm.
can turn it into 4, but it's actually 3 words.
Mhm.
It's recruit, train, and retain.
Mhm.
It's that simple. We got to recruit. How can we recruit? We're using the VR as a form of recruitment.
Mhm.
Now we can use it as a tool to help us train, and then I can throw retraining in there because
Mhm.
we can get some journeymen maybe to come in, and maybe in some of these skills that they need to improve on, we have
Mhm.
upgrading classes so we can retrain or
Yeah.
recertifications. One, I work with ACI, American Concrete Institute, and we have different certifications that we can get,
Mhm.
reaching hours and levels by depending how much time you have on equipment and so on, like
Mhm.
that, right? Those are recertifications. They expire after 4 or 5 years. So you
Mhm.
have to retrain, come back
Mhm.
into it, and keep those certifications active. So when I say train, I throw retrain in there as well. And then obviously we want to retain. We're
Right.
training our workforce. Now we need to keep them, hold on to them,
Mhm.
so we can keep performing the work. You had a podcast earlier with Jennifer Wilkerson, and
Mhm.
she had some great statistics that I'd like to talk about real quick. So one is 25% of our workforce is going to retire as of
Mhm.
2025,
Mhm.
and then 32% by 2028. So she said that every 4 workers that we are losing, we are only gaining 1.
Right.
So retaining is going to be the biggest key. We got to keep our people working. The more they work, the more they make, more valuable are to their contractors. They can build, raise their families and so on. The little hard work, you know what? You'd be surprised. You can make a pretty good living doing what we do in the trades.
Yeah, no, those are great takeaways, and I love it. It's concise, but it's it's dynamic, right? The other thing, we like an action item too, right? So if you're listening, this is making a lot of sense, right? You're a GC out there, you're kind of thinking about what are you going to do? What would you say that first step towards reviewing their training program should be? Tim, maybe I'll kick that over to you.
Yeah, so don't be afraid to welcome tech into your programs. A lot of you hear everybody say keep the cell phone out of the classroom. Well, we use QR codes in our trainings here that we put on because we realize what a wealth of information they're able to access when they use that cell phone. So let's put it to good use instead of having them going on X or Instagram or whatever. Also respect the people that you're training. Value the experience that they have, whether it's life experience or experience in the trade. And then we have to think about mentoring the next generation. I shared in our OSHA 502 back in February, I showed a picture of my mentor in the trade in one of my slides. We were working on San Francisco City Hall, rebuilding groin ceilings in this beautiful historic building. And, we've got to value those people who invested in us. And so we need to look for those people in our organization who are willing to invest in these young students, these young kids coming into our workforce, because if you just tell them you're soft, you can't take a joke. We need to understand where they're coming from, and we need to make it so that it's a trade that they would want to make a career out of.
Yeah, you can't overstate how important it is to have a mentor and someone to really take you under their wing and show you those things. So that's a great takeaway there. So guys, thank you so much for today. This has been such a great conversation. Before I let you go, quick little rapid fire question around here. We always like to ask people, but the knock on our industry is that we're slow to adopt technology. Are you seeing a shift, what in the industry as far as adopting these VR trainings and technologies? Are you seeing people more open-minded to kind of this new way of training people?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, technology is not going to go away. So you either embrace it or you're going to get left behind. It's as simple as that. You have to incorporate it into your trainings. And that is so key. I mean, Tim hit on a great one using the QR codes. Well, everything's a QR code now. You pieces of equipment, the literature that's on the equipment, on how to operate it, how to maintain it. There's no books anymore going on mobile aerial lifts and all these other equipments, right? It's a QR code that you're going to scan and it's going to give you that document.
Yeah.
And students can relate to technology better than we did. It's like they're born with a tablet in their hand compared to me and Tim, right? So you have to be able to adjust your program accordingly. You still got to give them the basic skill set of what it takes to be a cement mason and a plasterer. But then you also have to incorporate, we used to shoot elevations and we still do using a transit. Then we went to a laser level. Right? So now we're using robotic total stations.
Yeah.
Right? So we're in, that's a digital tape measure. So again, another form of technology, and we're kind of scared to use it. But if you think about it, when the cell phone first came out, we're like, there was the flip phone. We're like, okay, how are we going to use this? Right? Now we got the smartphone. How are you going to use that? Well, the more you use it, the more you understand it.
Yeah.
And the more you can use it to your benefit. And that's kind of what we're doing now. We're evolving with the times, right? You can't run your whole program on technology, but you can sure definitely use it in, as a benefit to your program for sure.
Yeah. I mean, look, you mentioned QR codes. kind of segues nicely into our next question. Something we ask everyone, but everywhere you go now, I feel like you don't get a menu anymore. You get the QR code at the table and you scan that. So guys, this is the Building Bite podcast. That stands for Building Insurance Technologies with the experts. You guys are today's experts here. So what are you taking a bite out of? What's the best local fare? What's the best burger? What's the best spot in town over in Maryland? Nick,
man. Now you're reaching into my wheelhouse,
agreement on this. We like every chance we get to go into Georgetown and go to Philomena. Probably have a little veal parmesan that doesn't fit on the plate. Maybe a little pasta with the Sunday sauce. So,
Philomena's, you can't go wrong. Definitely.
Philomena's.
And I'll take one more out, right? So new to this area is Canes. So this brings me to our instructor. We talked about mentoring, right? So we have our plastering instructor, Anthony Kirstens, that just is starting a family, and he's just had a baby.
Yeah.
And so on his birthday, we celebrated by going to get Canes, because that's the name of his baby. Spelled differently.
Oh.
So,
Nice.
if you've ever eaten Canes before, it's a lot of chicken fingers and stuff like that. It's got its own special taste, and
that's right.
It's excellent. So I like to give that one out to my man Anthony over there. Congratulations.
Yeah. We just got one of those Raising Canes up by me as well, so it's definitely very good. Well, guys, thank you again so much for connecting with us today. If our listeners want to connect with you, where's the best place for that? Email, LinkedIn? What's the best thing for them?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure we both have LinkedIn accounts. Our emails are similar. Mine is ndemonte at OPCMIA-ITF.org. And you can also go to, if you're looking to get into the trades, if you're looking to get into our organization, go to our website, OPCMIA.org. Very simple to remember that. And you can go on a training website on there that's as well. And it'll even kind of help you, depending on your location, help you get a hold of one of our local unions that are in that area. So it kind of helps get the ball rolling and get started. We want to promote our apprenticeship programs. Remember, it's recruitment's number one. We got to be able to recruit our future workforce. So definitely that's the best tip that I can give you.
Excellent.
Yeah, and like Nick said, I have a LinkedIn page as well, and LinkedIn account, and my email is similar to Nick's, tnelson@opcmia-itf.org.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having us, Michael.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.